Welcome to this video on the Zenora channel. Today we're going to talk about a very interesting subject, which is mental illness. Okay? And how does mental illness come into place with spiritual practice? Okay? So, you may have certain prejudices about people who talk to themselves. You may have certain prejudices about people who do weird things that you don't understand. Okay? We know for a fact that some people lose control of themselves at times, right? And do things that can hurt others, for example. Okay? We know that some people lose logical process, logical thought. Okay? So what are we seeing essentially? What do we call mental disease? We call it mania, right? We call it a phase where a period of a person's life, where they don't make sense to other people. Okay, where they're potentially no longer functional in regular society, okay, of where they are, okay, or less functional or disorganized, right? And we see different forms of mental illnesses. We even see mental illnesses in some forms where people hear voices, right? So what are all these? So we've talked a lot about yoga on this channel, and I invite you to listen to other videos on this channel. Okay, but let's talk about the hearing voices. So the first thing about hearing voices is that some beings in this world, remember that we live within a computer program, okay? And some beings within this world have the ability to project thoughts into other beings, okay? More advanced beings, okay? So at that point, if you're at a stage in your practice, and you have a being that's projecting thoughts in your mind, okay? At that point, depending on your level of awareness, you may be aware of these thoughts being projected into your mind, okay? And you might not be aware of them, okay? So if you are aware of them, you're aware of hearing voices, right? In that way, right? And you can have a communication with those voices in that sense, since telepathy has been established as a city, right? As an ability by that being that's communicating with you. So some people hear voices. And many types of beings have the ability to basically project their thoughts into living beings. Okay, so part of the practice of Zenora practice is basically strengthening your mind, right? And learning to be aware of the thoughts that you receive, okay? And the thoughts that originate with you, and what is the difference, okay? And as you have your 3 phases of yoga practice as a deva, as a light being of God, to receive the light of God, to hold the light of God, and to project. And the same thing with information, right? And you receive information to a level of purity, you hold it to a level of purity, and you project it to a level of purity depending on your intent and depending on your ability to maintain the purity of that information. Okay, so at that point you can see that if you don't have a control over what you're receiving and how you're holding it, you can get in all kinds of trouble. Okay, so the practice of yoga. Practice of yoga allows you to grow spiritually at the level of other lokas, okay, energy lokas that you can experience at the time of enlightenment. You actually grow as a being. You start towering. You grow upwards as a spiritual being as you develop. Okay, so there are some beings that can speak to people in their mind. Okay, that is an ability that does exist. Okay, deities can also speak to you in your mind. Okay, any being that has developed that ability of telepathy. Okay, and as a being that has not necessarily developed it, that has not necessarily developed those levels, that can drive a person crazy. Okay, another situation where sometimes people might start hearing God talk to them in their mind is if they're being activated as an agent in the system with a specific purpose by God. So God does have a function and is all-pervading being, okay, that can reach out to individual beings and talk to them in their mind, okay, and have conversations with them and instruct them with purpose, okay, so puts them on a mission, and we call this an agent in the system, okay, a little bit like in the movie The Matrix, Mr. Smith, that can take the form of any being. Any being can be activated by God as an agent with a specific purpose, and that being might be aware of that purpose and that mission, or less aware of it, and to the degree that they're meant to be aware of it and have an understanding to that degree as well. And why does God do this? Because everything has been created already, all the possibilities for the future, right? We exist within a system that's basically moving. We're moving from one system state to the next. right? And that's the movement of time, system states. So at that point, God knows the possibilities for the future and activates agents to make sure that direction goes, that creation goes in a direction that He wants, right? That He, for the betterment of everybody, for a better life for everybody, for freedom, for rights for everybody, for peace, for prosperity, and harmony under God, okay, and eternal life for everybody. So that's the mission of God, which is basically also seen as maintaining the equation that governs the Kala Chakra, the golden equation, maintaining it within its parameters, right? Balancing the equation, right? So that we stay within acceptable parameters of the equation and system, okay? So agents can get activated by God as well. Now, there are other types of mental disease that people experience, that doctors diagnose. Some of them, for example, have to do with beings that believe they have powers, right? So why do beings suddenly believe that they have powers, right? Maybe they're developing powers, maybe they're developing city powers, maybe they're at a stage of spiritual practice that has led them to city power practice, okay? And maybe potentially they're not under a guru, they don't have access to a guru, to good teachers in part of a lineage or parampara, okay, and they're not getting the guidance they need to maintain their sanity as they develop those powers in their practice, okay? So at that point, that's a possibility. Another possibility is, a good doctor will tell you powers don't exist, but if you look in the history and texts of the oldest cultures on this planet, and I'll take one example, the Hinduism and the old texts such as the Upanishads and different texts, the Shastras and all these, well, you do see that powers do exist, right? Beings do have powers, right? There are beings that are divine beings, right? And all these different things. So, how old is the science of psychiatry, and how old is the science of our history, our written history, and our told history as a species, right? So, I do invite a good psychiatrist to at least think about the possibility of this, and understand these things. So basically, when we're talking about powers do exist, right? Because different beings, human beings or other types of living beings, represent functions within the system, and this is the experience that you're having of life as that function within a computer, within a system. Okay, so at that point, different beings have different functions, so can develop different abilities specific to the function that they have, essentially, that they represent, their face, essentially, as a deva. Okay, and in that sense, people can develop different abilities, different cities, and if you're interested in learning about powers in text, you can research Yoga Siddhi powers, that's SIDDHI, and you have a description in different texts of different abilities that yogis can develop through yoga and practice, okay? And remember that practice exists through different lifetimes as well, okay? So people can develop specific powers, so if a patient of yours starts talking to you about a specific power, maybe they're making it up, maybe they're using their imagination, but maybe they've been developing a specific power. And maybe they can't show it to you at that point, but maybe they're not as crazy as you think, right? So other things that can lead to a situation where someone starts becoming crazy. If you become enlightened, well, you'll have a phase in your life after enlightenment where, depending on how you absorb it, right, it'll be very overwhelming. So at that point, you might have a state where, other people would think you're crazy because maybe now you start talking about all these things that other people don't see, don't understand, don't know about, right? So you're no longer acting in a way that other people can basically connect to, can understand properly, right? Because it's so fresh, your enlightenment, you're overwhelmed with it, right? Overwhelmed by your enlightenment and everything you just saw and learned and experienced, all your past lifetimes and all these things. So you might not even be immediately overwhelmed, but you might be overwhelmed once you start thinking about everything you just experienced, right? So at that point, you might not start acting normally, right? Or like you did before, right? At that point also, depending on how you take it, you might start even more advanced levels of practice. Now you're going to be doing enlightened practice. And as you enter into those levels of practice, where you know what your next stage of practice is to essentially put in place your enlightenment into the world, right? Establish your enlightenment into the world. You know, you're going to be going potentially through very intense phases of practice, of yoga practice, which bring you potentially to experiencing stories, very intense stories. So as you experience those stories within your mind, remembering those stories, experiencing those stories, you know, you may have difficulty making the distinction for a period of time between the stories and all the lokas that you're remembering and experiencing and all these different things and everything that you're seeing around you with your senses. So it creates basically an overload of information, an overload of your systems, an overload of your being, right? Which can basically drive you to a state that people would call crazy. Okay, you know, at that point, so maybe you start not acting normally. Maybe you, and what happens is you're probably at that, if that's what you're experiencing, you know, you're basically at that point you're engrossed in your spiritual experiences and you're losing your anchor in the physical world, right? So a guru can help you by basically giving you a means to talk to someone about those experiences that you're having, you know, and that person can provide guidance. Your guru can provide guidance, and basically having experienced all these different things themselves can basically help make sure you're grounded, right? And you remember that these are experiences, these are true, but everything in the reality is true as well, you know. So you can't get overloaded in your practice as well, you know. And you can, when you have to push through at hard stages, but understand that when you push through at those hard stages, look at it this way: if you're going to understand everything, understand all of creation, well, you're going to understand madness as well, right? And you have to push yourself into that madness to experience certain things, because certain experiences require a breaking of the mind. But you have to be able to bring yourself back to sanity after, right? And that's why a guru is going to anchor you and bring you back to, you know, put your feet back, your 2 feet back on earth, you know. So that's what happens. So often, you know, people that are going through very intense experiences, very advanced levels of yoga practice and discovery on themselves, if they don't have proper guidance, well, they're stuck trying to understand in their mind what comes first, what was this that I just experienced, what's this that I'm experiencing now, and it becomes an overload of the mind, because you're basically immersed in an ocean of new experiences, and you have to remember that it's that you have to keep your feet grounded, right? That you have to maintain your sanity, right? So sometimes it's important to remember that, you know, at that point. And there are some stages of yoga practice where, you know, you're experiencing and practicing abilities, you're practicing things based on what you experienced, right? And that practice brings you to a breaking of the mind, such as telepathy can bring you to a breaking of the mind, and other city powers as well, right? The ability to redevelop creation and all these different things. The abilities of a Shri, the abilities of a Buddha, right? So you can ask yourself, you know, tell yourself, if someone came here today and said, I'm a Buddha, I am a God, all this, you know, are they crazy or are they telling the truth, right? You don't know that. You have an opinion on it, but you're not a knower of the truth. You're not a Sadguru, okay? So I'll give you an example, okay? There's one gentleman that I've been seeing from my balcony outside who's often in the recycling bin and walking around in the area, and he looks like a homeless person, okay? He looks like a homeless person, and he's been gravitating around my building recently, okay? And I spoke to him with telepathy the other day, right? Because what happens is that person looks like a crazy person, okay, is talking to himself on the street and all these different things, okay, looks super tanned, like he's got no shirt on and he's in the street and all this stuff, right? But the reality of it is that this individual is actually a siddha yogi, okay, he's a siddha, Okay, so if you're interested in learning more about siddhas, you can learn more about that. And the reason he's gravitating around my building is because this is the center of the energy, the center of the knowledge, right? The presence, the location, the house of the Kalki avatar, right? Of the Sadguru. So basically he's gravitating around my building because he's pulled towards my building, and it's basically through his practice pulled towards here to the center so that he can draw from closer from me, right? In his practice. So this individual that looks crazy, that is talking to himself and all that, at the level of the spirituality is actually a siddha yogi. He's developed to the level of a siddha and is seeking to develop further. So life, the creation, the story, you brought him closer to his Sadguru, right? Closer to his deity, and from there he can pull and develop from closer. So I obviously sent him, I gave him a couple of missions and things to do to develop on his practice. And this is the levels of practice at higher levels of yoga development, of spiritual practice and spiritual development. Okay? So people, yes, people that you think are crazy are usually people that have gone through, okay, a spiritual experience and that have not been able to digest it. Okay? So what is the solution to this? Okay, what is the solution to this? Well, there are many solutions, and the solution is rest. Okay, when your yoga practice gets too intense, when your sadhana gets too intense, you can keep pushing through, but there's going to be consequences. Okay, eventually you need to rest. So whether for someone who's crazy, that means rest in a hospital, rest at home, rest, rest by taking some pills to slow the mind. Okay, you need to rest. Okay, and with rest, by putting your practice on hold, essentially, and by consciously taking a look at yourself as an individual, with the proper guidance of a Sadguru, okay, you can realize that you can basically learn to digest your spiritual experiences one after the other. So it basically slows down all the information overload in the mind. Okay, that's what it is, the craziness. It's an information overload in the mind. Okay, so you need to rest the mind, slow the mind, relax. No more advanced spiritual practice for a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months. Okay, until you recuperate, you return to a being that, and the definition of someone who's normal is someone who's able to function normally in society with other people. Okay, it's great that you're an advanced spiritual being, that you're having advanced spiritual practice and experiences and learning about yourself and all that, but you have to still be able to function in regular society. It's understandable that you'll have times where you might be wild, or you might be, having very intense experiences, but you need to be able to turn it off at will. Shut it on and shut it off at will. And that's part of development, of practice of spirituality. Turning it on, having control over it, having control over your experiences, having control over yourself, having control of when you're going forward and pursuing spiritual practice, having control of when you're just relaxing, right? Learning to control yourself, to have mastery of yourself. Okay? So what's the cure for people who are having mental disease is to continue their spiritual practice, not to stop and all their life think there's something wrong with them and that they're not normal. No, the cure is to relax, to become normal, to relax, to be able to function in society, and then to continue your practice. And then if you ever get sick again, to relax, and then to continue your practice. Okay? And this is the same for everybody. Not everybody will have necessarily very intense experiences, that could make them crazy, but better to have those experiences than not to have them. Better to be developing spiritually than not being developing spiritually, right? But all things must come in their time. So also in time comes mastery over yourself. So the solution is not to tell someone who's been developing spiritually. You're sick and you have to stop practicing yoga now and take medication. No, the medication might have a place to slow the mind of the individual. Okay, modern science, slow the mind. That's fine. Relax a little bit. Okay, but what the person needs to do is relax by themselves, on their own, to consciously look within themselves using their practice, right? It's their time to surpass that obstacle. Surpass the obstacle of their own mind and their own understanding of their experiences and what they've experienced or continue to experience. And to take control over it. Okay? And that is the cure to mental disease, to mental illness. Okay? It's not to snuff out the growth in a being. Okay? It's to slow the being down a little bit sometimes so that they can redevelop those proper foundations at that level that they've reached, so then they can move on to the next level. Okay? So basically, what is the cure for mental disease? Calming people down, slowing them down. Okay? But if you really want to cure it, they have to learn to control their mind consciously, right? So the solution to that is to continue the practice of Zen Aura, to continue the practice, okay? But also sometimes to take breaks, okay? Maybe at one point you realize that you're a Shri, that you're a divine being, you know, and it's driving you nuts because you don't know how to interact in normal society anymore. Take a break. Realize it's not that fun being a Shri. It's not that fun being a god. People are going to build statues of you and come worship you, and you're expected to help them out, right? Slow down in your practice. Take a break. Okay? And that is the cure to mental disease. To look at yourself, to look at your experience, and to finish processing the experiences that you've had. But for people that are going very quickly through spiritual practice, they might have many experiences back to back, and they're not giving themselves time to process that experience as they move from one experience to the next. So it creates an overload of the mind, and the cure is to slow down the information that comes to the mind. So doctors know this. For example, they'll put you, for example, in a place that doesn't have much stimulation, right? When you're trying to fix someone who's sick or in the mind, right? Exactly. You slow down the stimulation to the mind, okay, to the maximum degree, to allow the mind the time to heal on itself and to get out of that psychosis, that mental disease. Okay? If it's a different type of mental disease, for example, hearing the voices, for some people who hear voices, learning to control the mind. Who's talking to you? Why are they talking to you? How do you not let them talk to you? How do you control the mind? How do you basically regain that sanctity of your own mind, right? People are not mentally diseased, but some people have different experiences, and some people have stronger or weaker minds. And the manifestation of that is mental disease. There are many forms of mental disease that I have not talked about. Depression, many forms, okay? And they all have a reason, and they all have a solution, okay? People are not mentally ill as a state, as a being. They're not a being that's mentally ill. It's just that their condition at that time is mentally ill because they no longer presently at that time have conscious control over their actions and their ability to turn off their experiences and turn on their experiences. Okay, another thing too, potentially, they've been having many experiences potentially, some of them practicing things, so not necessarily things that are true, and some of them potentially true spiritual experiences. And it becomes a mix mash of different logical blocks that they build one on top of the other. But at that, you know, when are they cured? When they realize that that's a mix max of logical blocks, right? Logical thoughts that they have one after the other, that go on top of the other. Another thing too, when you're having many experiences, or when you're pushing your spiritual development very quickly, you can have many thoughts very quickly. So this is an acceleration of the thoughts. Okay, so what is the solution to this? To slow down the thoughts. Because when you have an acceleration of the thoughts, it goes too quickly. It goes too quickly. So some of the thoughts are based in truth, some of the thoughts are not based in truth. Right? And if you're building your next thought, right, based on the thoughts you previously had, and some of those were not based in truth, then your future thoughts might not be based in truth. Okay, so when you see people that are basically mentally diseased, that are talking to themselves on the street and all this, it's usually because they're at a very important time in their spiritual practice. Okay, they're going through some intense spiritual practice. You know, they might be doing some weird stuff with things on the street that you don't understand. Maybe they're seeing the world in a different way. They're interpreting what they see from this world in their experience of a different loka, for example. Okay, you know, are people that are sick? Yes, they are sick. And what is the solution to that? It's rest. Rest, and then once rested, to return to practice of spirituality. Okay? Don't let someone else tell you that you're sick and that you can't practice spirituality anymore. That doesn't make sense. Who is this other person? How long have they studied? Maybe you remember studying for multiple lifetimes, right? But so there is a link between spiritual experience, okay, basically experiences acquired through yoga practice, okay, whether that be experiences through grace, okay, all that is spiritual. There is a link between experiences at the spiritual level and mental disease. And what is mental disease? Mental disease is when you can no longer process everything you were experiencing spiritually. Okay, everything you're experiencing that is not a direct experience of what you visually see, visually touch, visually hear, or hear physically is what I mean, right? So anytime that you have other types of information that are coming in, right? So information gained through the Akashic records, if you want to call it that way, okay, through the system, okay, you become sick. As people develop further in the heights of spirituality, going back to that example of that siddha that's gravitating around my place, okay, at that point, you know, it looks like that person is sick because they're now interacting with the world in a different way, right? So I gave him the challenge, right, when I was speaking to him, to remember how to interact in a normal way, right? To get back to just a normal, relaxed life, you know, to keep your accomplishments, to keep your powers, to keep your knowledge, but to now be able to function in a more smooth way, you know, to be more adaptable, to learn to adjust to your circumstances, right? So I give this challenge to all who practice yoga, to practice Zenwara. You know, if you ever have experiences through the practice of Zenwara where you challenge your sanity, you know, where you push your sanity, you experience things that cannot be experienced in a normal state of mind, well, now that's fine. But remember that you're going to have to pull yourself out of it. You're going to have to pull yourself back into a regular way of acting, a regular way of being, because that's part of learning to connect well with the system. And if you stay wild and crazy, well, you won't be able to connect well with other people, right? With the system. So if you want to use your newly gained spiritual abilities, right, to help creation and to uphold and promote the Dharma, right? Well, you're going to have to do it in a way where other people can understand you and can relate to you and can basically understand you, right? You know, and if you're speaking crazy, if you're not making any sense, you know, maybe you're very advanced spiritually, but you haven't acquired mastery over yourself yet. Well, you're not necessarily at that point where you're ready to help others. You know, you're still working on finding yourself. You know, so maybe you can help others, but maybe not in all the ways that you could if you had found yourself. Okay. So people who have mental disease are often people who are advancing spiritually, okay, and who are not receiving the proper guidance, okay, or just advancing at such a high and fast speed spiritually that they're being disconnected from their ability to act normally, okay, and they have to learn how to shut it on, turn it on, and shut it off at will. It's not shutting it off and no longer advancing spiritually. That's not better. It's learning to control your mind, to control your being. You know, right now I can do very advanced levels of spiritual practice just like this. In 1 second, I can get into very high levels of spiritual practice. But there's also a time to be normal. You know, you have to suit the moment, adapt to the moment, be adaptable. You know, maybe also some people that are very advanced spiritually, they see themselves now as a god on earth, you know, and they think that something's deserved to them potentially in that sense or something like that as a very advanced spiritual being, you know. And it's remembering to keep your 2 feet on earth, you know. You really want people bowing down, scraping down to you, or you just want to have a good solid friend that you know you can depend on and you can shake their hand, bow to them, you know, do whatever you do, and just depend on that person to have your back in your moment of need when you have a moment of need. And as an advanced spiritual being, you see yourself as a guru, as a teacher potentially, you know, to train them and train their mind so that they are even stronger and you can depend on them even more. You know, and that's what you do with your friends, with your allies. You share the good moments with them and you teach them the things you know. You know, it's like a guy working in his lawn, you know, working with a friend, you know, maybe tuning the engine of the lawnmower or something like that, or, you know, teaching his friend, you know, how to put on the tip on the weed eater or something like that. You know, it's that communication of knowledge. You know, it's basically understanding that, you know, you've grown spiritually, and that's great. And once you attain mastery over that, now it's time for you to help other people going through the journey so that they also can become people one day that you can depend on, you know, enlightened people. So yes, there is a direct link between spiritual growth and mental disease, okay, or what people look at and see as mental disease. And what is mental disease? Essentially, it's when your experiences of life, okay, whether they come from someone else or through your own spiritual growth or grace of the divine, when your experiences of life become overwhelming, okay, overwhelm your mind and leave you in an overwhelmed state. And from there, from the overwhelmed state, you have to find yourself back to your peace of mind, okay, which comes in the control and mastery over yourself, but temporarily in rest until you achieve that mastery. So don't forget to rest, okay? I hope this video provides some information that helps people understand the link between mental disease, okay, and spiritual practice. Some people will experience mental disease in their spiritual practice, okay, and this becomes a part of their experience, right? Can you truly know everything if you haven't known mental disease, if you haven't known those levels of overwhelming your brain, right? Can you really have achieved all those levels that are achievable? And if you haven't learned to achieve mastery over those accelerated processes of your mind, you haven't achieved mastery, okay? So thank you for listening to this video on the Zen Aura channel, and have a great day.